Musa had just relocated to a new city after spending most of his life in the same one. Change had always been difficult for him, especially since he had experienced trauma related to losing things and his environment shifting every few months. He had secured a small flat and spent nearly the entire day trying to stay calm while setting it up enough to sleep in. Before leaving the flat, he made sure to do everything he needed because he knew he would be too tired to do anything when he returned. Although he didn't finish setting up his place that day, he had time. His main focus had been elsewhere. Musa wasn't wealthy, but he had enough to live comfortably and was grateful for that. Being an orphan who moved from one foster home to another, Musa hadn't completed secondary school by the age of 18. Somehow, he always ended up back in the orphanage because no one wanted to keep him for long. After leaving, Musa started working at a small cafe, earning enough to feed himself for the first few months, after which he saved enough to stop living on the streets and get a small flat. He hadn't had many possessions growing up, so he learned responsibility early on. It wasn't terrible, but Musa wished he could have learned without going through so much hardship. He was determined to have a good life and was motivated to work hard for it. After getting his flat and becoming stable enough not to starve, Musa enrolled in a public school to finish his secondary education. But he wasn't satisfied with just that. As soon as school ended, Musa started looking at different colleges, researching student loans, and figuring out how he could get in. After many hardships and nights spent crying and doubting himself, Musa finally managed to get into college and decided to pursue a degree in finance. That's how he ended up becoming a successful real estate agent after years of hard work, and he couldn't be prouder of himself for making it this far without any help. You see, Musa grew up without any adult support. Even his earliest childhood memory was of the orphanage, and Musa hoped that one day he would find someone who could tell him about his life before he was an orphan. However, he was slowly losing hope every day. He had been trying to find his parents since he left the orphanage at 18, but it had been years with no luck. He didn't know where to start, who to ask, or where to go. Musa had tried asking the orphanage about them, hoping they had some records of his parents from when they dropped him off, but he was told they had no clue who his real parents were because he had been left on the orphanage's doorstep one random night, and no one had ever visited him. Even his name had been chosen by the head of the orphanage at that time, because he was barely a year old when he was left there. When Musa first heard that, it felt like someone had driven a knife into his heart and twisted it as much as they could. He couldn't believe how unwanted he was, that no one wanted him in their life, and had just left him on a doorstep. He had always had a lonely life, with no real friends in the orphanage and barely any in college. That's not to say he didn't have a good college life. He had the best roommate he could have asked for and managed to make a lot of friends during the 4 years he spent there. He was still in touch with them, but there was only one person he felt a deep connection with, and that was his roommate, Kwame. Kwame came from a well-off family, so he was completely different from Musa. When he first came to their dorm, Musa thought he would be a pretentious guy with no real understanding of the value of money and decided it would be best if they stayed on their own sides of the room. He didn't want anyone looking at him weirdly because he was an orphan barely managing to get by each month. But Kwame turned out to be the complete opposite. He was understanding, grateful, and more importantly, selfless. Musa often joked that Kwame was a lion with the heart of a lamb. That's how kind he was. In his entire 19 years of life, Musa had never met someone so positive. On the first day of living together, Kwame had talked to Musa more than Musa had ever talked to anyone. They got to know each other and discovered they had much more in common than expected. Their eating habits, their movie preferences, even their routines were almost exactly the same. The only difference was that Kwame showed his care through gifts and spending money on Musa, while Musa showed his appreciation by helping Kwame with homework, making sure he took care of himself, and constantly cooking for him. But that was more for himself than for Kwame. Cooking was a source of comfort for Musa, something he could do for the rest of his life without getting tired of it. He developed this interest as a child in the orphanage. Since Musa had difficulty making friends, he had to choose between staying alone and bored in his room all day or helping the staff in the kitchen. The first time he ended up in the kitchen was when he was so bored that he went to the gardens to try and spend some time watching the birds, but it quickly became tedious, and honestly, he wasn't that interested in birds. Apparently, someone noticed how miserable birdwatching made him because one of the volunteers at the orphanage came up to him and invited him to roam around the building with her. The volunteer, Amina, was known for being a sweet young lady who helped kids with whatever they needed and always tried to ensure they were happy and healthy. During the tour she was giving Musa, she mentioned that there was a shortage of people working in the kitchen and that they could use all the help they could get. Amina wasn't expecting Musa to volunteer so suddenly. She had tried to tell him it was okay if he didn't want to work so hard, but he told her he preferred to be assigned to the kitchen rather than do other chores, so she agreed. They decided that as long as Musa wasn't neglecting his other duties, he could help in the kitchen as much as he liked. That's how Musa realized how much he loved cooking. He even debated dropping his finance degree to pursue a career in culinary arts, but he wanted to keep his hobbies as hobbies, fearing that being forced to cook all the time might make him start disliking it. Musa was responsible for cooking all the meals for himself and Kwame during college. Kwame could afford all the necessary ingredients, but he didn't know how to cook, so he relied on instant food and deliveries during the first week. Musa thought Kwame might be tired from settling into a new university and getting everything done to register for his courses, which is why he was constantly eating out. But a few weeks passed, and he was still doing it. Musa was flabbergasted, to say the least. He knew how unhealthy this lifestyle was, and couldn't just stand by and watch his roommate ruin his health, so he decided to cook for them. He only had enough money to buy groceries to cook for himself, so he decided to give half the servings to Kwame and keep half for himself. However, Kwame quickly shut down that idea and insisted that if Musa was going to cook for him regularly, the least he could do was pay for the groceries. That's how they ended up with fresh homemade meals for nearly 4 years of their bachelor's degree. Kwame was still Musa's best friend, having moved to this city together, although they had separate flats because Kwame decided to live with his girlfriend. They had been together since college, and had the purest relationship Musa had ever seen, not that he had seen many, to be honest. Musa had his fair share of relationships, but none of them lasted long. They all happened after he started college at 19 and became more open to socializing with people. His first girlfriend was a girl in his math class during freshman year. They bonded over an assignment that was so tough they had to help each other to finish it on time. She was also his first everything. Her name was Zuri, and she was one of the few people Musa wanted to keep close to him, but unfortunately they drifted apart after they broke up. Now they only talked to each other to wish the other a happy birthday. They had a pretty healthy relationship. The only reason they broke up was that they had very different goals in life. Musa wanted to get his life together before anything else, while Zuri wanted to settle down as soon as possible. It's not like Musa was opposed to settling down with Zuri. He loved her deeply, and the thought of spending the rest of his life with her brought warm feelings to his chest. However, he didn't think he was ready to settle down and start a family right after college. His goal was to get his degree, get a job, and achieve enough financial stability to live comfortably without worrying about living paycheck to paycheck. He especially wanted to be financially stable if he planned to start a family. He wanted his child or children to have everything he didn't have growing up, and he wasn't sure he could provide that at such a young age. So they broke up. It was sad, and Musa spent almost a week moping in his room before he could muster the energy to get out and hang with his friends instead of closing himself off in his dorm and eating instant noodles for the whole week. But he knew it was the right decision. After settling into his flat, Musa grabbed his phone, wallet, and keys and headed out the door. His first stop was the small market to pick up some essentials and food for his home. He ran out of there, hands full of shopping bags, and rushed to put them in the trunk of his car. Getting back into the car, he immediately input the address of the orphanage near his home into the GPS and headed out of the parking lot. This had been on his mind since he decided to move. Would he still be able to visit the orphanage? He hoped he would have the time like he always did. This was something he couldn't bear to stop doing. Musa had made it a habit to give back to the orphanage as soon as he started earning money. He knew how tough life could be there and wanted to do everything he could to help the kids living there. He knew he couldn't do much, but he believed they deserved a good life, that someone cared for them, and that they weren't unwanted. God knows he needed someone like that during his stay there. He made sure to donate everything he no longer used or had extras of to the orphanage, and even tried to take time out of his schedule to play with the kids and chat with the older ones so they had someone they could rely on. He knew that some of the staff there were always loving toward the kids and made them feel cared for. But you can never be too sure. He didn't want to leave it to chance if he wasn't sure. When he decided to move, Kwame asked him if he would continue doing this. Musa knew that Kwame didn't fully understand why he was doing all of this in the first place. Kwame had asked Musa why he would voluntarily go back to orphanages when he had such unpleasant memories of that place, but Musa tried to explain that it was because of those very memories that he insisted on going back. If Musa hadn't had a good experience, he wanted to make sure he could contribute to making it a good experience for other kids going through the same thing. He knew that if an adult had supported him during that time, he might not have come out of the orphanage with so many unresolved issues that almost ruined his life. He had missed so many opportunities because of his insecurities and self-doubt, and he had destroyed many relationships because he felt as unwanted by others as he was by the people who gave birth to him. He didn't like calling them his parents, arguing that no parent would ever leave their child on a doorstep in the middle of the night and lose all contact with them. That's not what parents do. He had tried to get over his anger toward them, sought therapy, and focused on his mental health, but he accepted that he would never be able to call them his parents. The only reason he was trying to find them was to get some clarity on why they did what they did. He knew that understanding their reasoning and clearing the air would help him overcome his fears, but he hadn't had any luck finding them so far. When he reached the orphanage, he got out of his car and took out the bag of extra groceries he had bought for the place. As he entered, he saw kids playing on the grounds, some sitting on benches reading books that looked well cared for, and even spotted some of the older kids playing with the younger ones, who looked around 5 years old. As always, as soon as he entered the place, a whirlwind of emotions hit him: nostalgia, anger, sadness. So many things were running through his mind that he almost dropped the bags due to his hands shaking. As he looked at his surroundings, a voice cut through his thoughts. "Hello there, can I help you?" He turned to see a woman who seemed to be in her mid-30s, smiling at him. She seemed so lovely he wondered if she was the head of the place. He smiled back and told her he was there to volunteer to help the kids and had brought groceries, showing her the shopping bags in his hands full of various food and drinks. She seemed shocked for a moment before her face broke into a happy smile, and she ushered him inside her office. It turned out she was the head of the orphanage. When he got to her office, he was surprised by how simple and minimalist it was. The walls were white with shelves holding all sorts of records and files, and a desk sat in the middle of the room. The woman sat down in her chair, opened up her computer, and gestured for Musa to sit down as she noted his name, age, and other information. She paused and looked up at him before continuing. Musa had asked to register as a regular volunteer and was ready to help if they needed an extra hand. Maybe she was looking at him too intently, trying to figure out if he was a good person or how well off he was. Those were the only explanations Musa could come up with, and they seemed logical but unnecessary. He guessed he could understand why they needed to make sure he was a good person since he would be interacting with the kids, but this was getting a little extreme. He fidgeted in his seat, feeling super uncomfortable with all the staring, but the woman seemed to pay no attention to that and continued glancing at him while filling out the paperwork. "Miss Delmini." He called out hesitantly, having found her name on the plaque on her desk that read Nomvula Delmini. She looked up at him, her hand stopping where she was filling in the information. "Yes?" she asked before putting down the pen and giving Musa her full attention. "I understand you need to ensure that the kids here are safe, but I assure you I have no ulterior motives. I'm just here to help the kids and provide them with whatever they need," he said, growing more confident with each sentence. He had done this multiple times, though no one had ever looked at him the way Nomvula did. She gasped before shaking her head and apologizing, rising from her seat. "Oh no, Musa, that's not something I'm worried about. I can already tell you're a gentleman. Why would you think that?" Musa was super confused. If it wasn't for safety concerns, why was she looking at him like this? Maybe she didn't trust him and was lying to protect her image. Could that be it? Well, the only way to find out was to ask. I'm sorry if I'm crossing the line, but I've been noticing your behavior for a few minutes, and it hasn't really been pleasant. Ever since I came in, you seemed shocked to see me. But maybe that's because I was volunteering. You've also been staring at me really weirdly since I came into your office, and I've noticed you keep glancing up at me like you're expecting me to say something. Still, I'm not sure what you want or need me to do. If you could tell me what's wrong. Maybe I could address it, and we can move on. Namvula looked guilty, and for a moment, Musa felt bad for calling her out like this. He could have done a better job and been nicer, but his mouth just started speaking, and he didn't know when to stop. Before he could apologize, Namvula began to speak again, apologizing profusely before giving him an explanation. I don't have anything against you, Musa, so don't worry about me not liking you. I can tell you're a really nice guy. The only reason I was staring at you and constantly glancing at you was to see your face, actually. You see, there's a kid around 5 years old, I'm not sure exactly. I'll have to check, but he looks exactly like you. His hair, his eyes, and even some of his mannerisms are just like yours. I've never seen someone come in here and have a kid look and act exactly like them. Of course, there are some differences, but for the most part, he resembles you a lot, she said, staring at him with hesitant eyes. Telling someone who came into the orphanage that a child looked like them could be something a lot of people might not be pleased about, and for Namvula, this was scary. How would she ask the man anything about the child without the potential danger of offending him? She wanted to know, wanted to confirm, even if she was just being delusional. You could say she knew there weren't many possibilities of the child being related to this man. But with the similarity, she wasn't sure if she should trust her gut or not. When Musa heard that, he thought, what did she mean that the child looked exactly like him? Was she implying that he had a secret child or something ridiculous? He knew he had no child, he was sure he would know if he did. Musa hadn't even been with anyone for the past few years, so he didn't think it was possible. Surely this woman must be mistaken. Naturally, he ignored it, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he should meet the child. Still, he wasn't sure why he was so hesitant. What if the child was actually his? What would he do then? It seemed like Namvula saw the hesitation on his face because she offered to let him meet the child if he wanted, and even told him that the child's mom came in every other week to check on him, so if he wanted to be sure, he could meet with her as well. But Musa didn't want that. Why would he? He was pretty sure the child wasn't his, so there was no point in doing all of this just to confirm what he already believed. Musa politely declined the offer, telling Namvula to focus on registering him as a regular volunteer, and abruptly left the office, completely out of breath, his heart racing. Why was he so out of breath? Why did all of this affect him so much? He knew he had a special connection to the kids in the orphanage, having gone through it himself, but he didn't think he would feel this burden by a child just because he looked like him. It's not like the child was his just because he looked like Musa. Musa resembled many people, but that didn't mean he was related to any of them. Or could he be? Honestly, he was an orphan, so he couldn't tell even if he wanted to. Disregarding all of this, he didn't have time to think about such irrelevant and stupid stuff, and there was no way he would waste his time on it. Musa finally decided to head home and start setting up his flat with a sour taste and a constant frown etched on his face. Musa got into his car and drove off, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white, and his mind was void of any optimistic thoughts. When Musa got home, he took the groceries out of his car and brought them inside, all while contemplating whether to call Kwame again or not. Was it that big of a situation that he would want to involve other people in? What if it was nothing, and Musa was just overthinking? He didn't want to worry about unnecessary things, especially when he had his own issues to stress about. Musa could handle it on his own, even though he thought there wasn't much left to handle. He knew he would meet the child when he returned to the orphanage, which he knew would be soon. He didn't mind meeting the child, per se. He felt like the only reason he got so upset was because Namvula had implied that Musa might have something to do with the child, which was a bizarre assumption if Musa said so himself. Why was she assuming that Musa had a child when she knew nothing about him or his past? It didn't make sense, and Musa was extremely annoyed. However, he tried to let it go. He didn't want this small interaction to ruin his entire day, Instead, he channeled all his energy into decorating his flat and setting it up. That was something Musa loved about himself. He turned his negative energy into something productive every time. Again, this was something he learned in his childhood. As a kid, Musa wasn't given the space and time to grieve or show his emotions. He had a tough time during his early years at the orphanage. He was picked on a lot, and barely anyone stood up for him. Even after all that, if he spent his time crying and trying to validate his feelings, someone would come in and tell him that he needed to get up and stop wasting time. At that time, it felt like the whole world was against him, but now he was grateful because those experiences allowed him to grow and understand how the world works. It sucked that he had to grow up so quickly, but there were moments in his life when he appreciated those experiences, like right now. Musa moved his furniture, unpacked the groceries, and unpacked all his belongings before it was time for dinner. He had the option of ordering out, mainly because he knew it had been a tough day mentally and emotionally, so he deserved to treat himself. But that was the exact reason he wanted to cook. He wanted to let off steam and ideally end the day by cooking. He was in the middle of cooking when he received a call from Kwame, who said he and his girlfriend Ayo were coming over for a housewarming party. Musa was very close to them, so he didn't mind that they were coming on short notice. He continued cooking dinner, rushing a little to have enough time to shower before they arrived. He finished cooking and showering just 5 minutes before he heard the doorbell ring. He quickly finished drying his hair with a towel before rushing to open the door for them. As soon as he saw his brother-like best friend standing on the other side of the door, a big smile spread across his face, and he grinned as he took Kwame in a big hug. It had been a while since they last met, and Musa and Kwame were used to seeing each other almost every day, so it had been tough living separately. After ushering Kwame and Ayo inside, Musa was about to lead them to the dinner table when he noticed Kwame had stopped in the middle of the living room and was just staring at the house, turning in circles with an unreadable expression. This was one of the few times Musa couldn't read what Kwame was thinking, making him really uncomfortable. "Hey man, what's up?" "You good?" Musa asked, coming beside Kwame, concerned. Kwame looked at him for a few seconds before glancing at Ayo, who had gone to the kitchen to help Musa set up the table. "Are you okay?" Kwame asked him in return. "What?" Musa was confused. "Why would you ask that?" Confused, Musa answered Kwame, telling him he was perfectly fine, which was a lie, but again he didn't think it was that important, so he let it go. "You moved in today, your house is in perfect condition, your groceries are here, you've cooked dinner, and you're all set. You only do that when something is bothering you, so what's wrong? And don't lie to me, Musa, you know I can tell." Musa knew he wouldn't be able to get out of this, so he opened his mouth to speak when Ayo's voice cut through the living room, asking what was taking them so long, and that the food was going to get cold. Musa motioned for Kwame to go into the kitchen, following him there, nodding to reassure Kwame that he would tell him what was happening. Dinner had been fantastic. They talked about everything, and there wasn't a second when they weren't laughing or didn't have a smile on their face. This right here was everything Musa wanted. They were his family, and he couldn't be more grateful. So he decided to confide in them, telling them what had happened after they cleaned up the kitchen. They all sat down in the living room, drinking sodas and chatting about life when Musa decided now would be the perfect time. He called their names, and when he had their full attention, he told them everything: how he went to the orphanage, met Namvila, what she had told him, how she was acting, and even how his body reacted. By the time Musa was done speaking, there was silence in the room. He knew what they were thinking, sort of, but he wasn't sure how they would react. Externally, he saw a lot of shock on their faces at first, but they soon came to an understanding after Musa explained what he was feeling and how his body reacted, even though he wasn't sure he fully understood what was going on with his body. After a moment of silence, Ayo was the first to speak up. She explained that even though the child might look like him, there was no guarantee he was Musa's son, mainly because Musa had no recollection of being in that kind of relationship with anyone. As mentioned earlier, Musa's only real relationship was when he was 19. Even though the breakup was mutual, and they had talked about it for a while because of their different views on life, it had still been abrupt because Zuri had just decided to leave one day without a proper explanation. Musa didn't need to be told that she wouldn't come back, but he didn't think he'd remember anyone from his childhood. Even Kwame expressed his concern about the situation and told Musa not to worry too much because he knew how Musa tended to overthink every little problem. Kwame suggested that Musa should meet the child to see what it was all about, but Musa didn't think he was up for that. He was still going to continue going to the orphanage, donating and helping out, and playing with the kids, but he didn't feel like he should go there just to meet a child who looked exactly like him. In the schedule Musa had made in his mind, he was planning to go to the orphanage next week to bring clothes and shoes for the kids. It was going to be Christmas soon, and he didn't want any child to feel like they didn't get any presents just because they didn't have anyone to give them to. With that decided, Musa let go of whatever he had been thinking about for the week and planned to deal with it when the day came. He didn't have to worry about forcing his thoughts away, because the entire week had been so busy with him moving and starting a new job as a real estate agent in the area that he didn't have time for anything else. It had all been too much to deal with in 1 week, so Musa didn't have time to think about anything else. He was so exhausted every night when he came home from work that he would crash as soon as he got home, only to wake up the next day and continue the same routine. The week flew by quickly, and soon it was the day he was supposed to go to the orphanage. That morning, Musa drove off to the orphanage, feeling nervous but also a little excited to meet the child who apparently resembled him so closely that people could mistake him for his own child. He gathered up the extra clothes he had packed, bought new ones as well, and did the same with shoes, storing them all in a big box that he placed in the trunk of his car. The beginning of the day went smoothly. He arrived at the orphanage, played with the kids, and donated everything he had brought. He was just enjoying his time interacting with them when Namvula came up to him and told him that the child who looked exactly like him would be coming down any minute. The child had been a little sick recently and was getting some rest, but he would be there soon. However, Musa had no idea that he was about to get the biggest shock of his life when the child finally appeared. When Ndidi, the child's name, came down, Musa froze in place. He couldn't believe his eyes. Honestly, at first he thought everyone around him was exaggerating when they told him that the child looked like him, but now that he saw Ndidi, he knew they weren't exaggerating at all. Ndidi looked like a smaller version of Musa. Everything from his eyes to his hair, his build, and even the way he fiddled with his fingers was exactly like Musa. How could this be possible? He knew people sometimes resembled each other, but wasn't this too much? Now he understood why Namvula thought this child was his son. Maybe he did want to interact with him. Musa made his way toward Ndidi and sat on the bench next to him. "Hey there, buddy. How are you?" Musa asked. Ndidi looked up at him with his dark brown eyes, which reminded Musa of a gazelle, and smiled before greeting him back. They introduced themselves, and soon the conversation flowed naturally. About 15 to 20 minutes into their talk, Ndidi mentioned that his mom was coming to visit him today. This made Musa pause mid-sentence. His mom? Maybe Musa could meet her, or perhaps he could stay with Ndidi until she arrived. He didn't know why, but he felt a sudden connection to this child, and he knew he would do whatever he could to protect him. Shooting a quick text to his group chat with Kwame and Io, he got ready to meet the mother of a child who looked like he could be his son. It wasn't long before Ndidi suddenly became even more excited, and when Musa asked him why, Ndidi said it was because his mom was here. Musa looked up to see a young woman frozen in her tracks, eyes locked on him. He didn't seem to recognize her, so he wasn't sure why she was so shocked. He got up to greet her, but he too froze in place. He just had to look at her for a few more seconds before he finally realized who he was looking at. Zuri, his first girlfriend. "Okay, hold up. Back up now," was all Musa could think for the next minute as they stared at each other. What just happened? Was that Zuri's child? Who was the father? Was it him? Is that why the child looked so much like him? All these thoughts were racing through his mind, and he almost stumbled, overwhelmed by everything. He didn't want to jump to conclusions, but according to his calculations, Ndidi should have been born around the time they broke up. Shaking his head, Musa looked down to find Ndidi trying to drag him toward Zuri by tugging on his jeans. When they came face to face, Ndidi introduced Zuri as his mom, saying he didn't have a father. Musa noticed that Ndidi was too honest for a child and also saw the flinch on Zuri's face when Ndidi mentioned his father. Hey, they both whispered at the same time, smiling knowingly because they used to do this often. Their cheeks flushed before they greeted each other properly. Your son? Musa asked, motioning toward Ndidi. Zuri nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line when Musa asked who the father was. She took a deep breath before telling Ndidi to go play with the other kids. He's your child, Zuri said as soon as Ndidi ran off. Even though Musa was starting to suspect it, it felt like his entire world had shattered. He had a child? How? He had just turned 25 a couple of months ago. He wasn't ready to have a child, let alone a child he had no idea existed until this week. That's not possible. We haven't been together in years. Zuri, his voice shook, trying to convey his desperation. But Zuri just shook her head. We haven't been together in 6 years, Musa, and Ndidi is 5 now. I'm sure you're smart enough to calculate the possibility yourself, she told him, but she kept her voice low, looking down at her hands and fiddling with her rings while she spoke, even after almost an hour of discussing it. One thing wouldn't leave Musa's mind: why had Zuri left Ndidi? Namvula had told Musa that Ndidi had been there since he was a baby. And his own child had been in an orphanage when Musa had sworn his children would never have to go through what he did. This didn't sit right with him. Musa still refused to believe it, but Zuri told him he could get a DNA test to confirm it. He couldn't believe Zuri would do something like this, especially knowing Musa's past, but he decided not to assume anything since there could be a valid reason for her actions. I had Ndidi when we were in college. He was born during our 2nd year. Do you remember how I broke up with you right before that? I knew I was pregnant with him and was scared someone would find out. I knew we both had different goals, and you didn't want to start a family so soon. Honestly, I wasn't planning on having a child this early in life. I thought if I told you, you'd get mad and tell me to get out of your life. At that time, it felt easier to leave on my own than to hear you say those words. So that's what I did. I took a gap year during my pregnancy and found a place to live alone. My family didn't support me having a child before I was married, so I hid it from them and decided to raise Ndidi by myself with the help of a few friends. I was still a kid, I didn't know how to care for a child, and I couldn't afford it either, so I moved away after he was born and came across this orphanage. I dropped him off here but still come to visit him every week, so he knows who his mom is. But I still can't afford to take care of him on my own. I have enough money to take care of myself, but I don't think I have enough to support a child. I know how you feel about it, and I should have told you about Ndidi sooner. I'm sorry, Zuri explained to Musa. Honestly, Musa was furious. She knew he didn't want a child at that time, but that didn't give Zuri the right to leave his child at an orphanage without even telling him. His son had to grow up without knowing who his father was, with his mom visiting once a week. He understood Zuri's reasoning, he really did, but she didn't have the right to make decisions for him. He stood up and left without saying a word to anyone. He needed some time to clear his head, and the only person Musa could turn to was Kwame. So that's exactly who he called. As soon as Kwame heard what had happened, he rushed to Musa's flat, opened the door with the spare key Musa had given him the night before, and took him in a hug. That's all Musa needed to burst into tears, soaking the black shirt Kwame was wearing. He felt so guilty about Ndidi being in the orphanage, but he was also angry at Zuri for not telling him. Most of all, he was scared and confused. He didn't know what to do next. Was he going to continue his life as it was, and ignore the fact that he had a 5-year-old son? Would he never find out if he had moved because of his job? Or was he going to bring Ndidi home and become a single father at 26? Knowing Zuri still had no interest in taking him back. Kwame stayed the night, discussing Musa's future and what was next. Kwame knew exactly how Musa felt and provided him with the support he needed. Musa had never been so grateful for someone in his life. He felt a sudden urge to tell Kwame how much he meant to him, and that he was the best friend anyone could ever ask for, turning the night into an emotional one for both of them as they cried and told each other how much they meant to each other. Their conversation helped Musa decide what he needed to do. Even though Ndidi had been all smiles when they met, that didn't mean he was happy there and didn't deserve to have a life without his parents. He deserved to know that there were people out there who cared for him and that they would choose him over anything. Although Musa had only met Ndidi once, the sudden urge to protect him that appeared at the orphanage had grown into something much bigger. When he told Kwame that he would get custody of Ndidi, Kwame had been so excited that he kept going on about how he would be the best uncle and spoil Ndidi to the core. Musa couldn't wait. This was his son, and Musa would do anything and everything to ensure he had a wonderful life ahead of him, surrounded by people who supported and loved him, just as Kwame had done for Musa. The entire process took months. Gaining custody of a child up for adoption was not an easy or short process. Musa had to get lawyers to fight his case and prove that he had no idea he even had a child, let alone one who was up for adoption. This also brought Zuri in to testify about his statement and agree that she would have no legal custody over Ndidi and that all his rights would go to Musa. During the months of legal proceedings, Musa had been given a lot of time to bond and interact with Ndidi, though they still couldn't live together. So Musa had to settle for meeting Ndidi at the orphanage every day. He made it a routine to go there and spend time with his son after work each day. That didn't mean Musa had forgotten about the other kids. He still brought clothes and groceries for them every other week and spent some time volunteering with them. The legal proceedings continued through Christmas, which bummed Musa out a lot. He had hoped to spend Christmas with Ndidi and make it the best one he had ever had, but those plans were dashed when he heard it would take a few more months. However, Musa changed his plans when he was told that Ndidi could live with him by the new year, even if it might take a couple more months to legally gain custody. The week after Christmas was busy, to say the least. Kwame made sure to buy everything he could for Ndidi, while Musa made sure the flat was comfortable, and that Ndidi would have everything he needed to stay there, from arranging a new bedroom to getting all kinds of cereal he thought a 5-year-old would like. Meanwhile, Ayo planned to cook enough food to last Musa and Ndidi an entire month. With all three of them working on their respective tasks and being busy the entire week, it flew by, and soon it was the day they were to bring Ndidi home. Musa spent the entire morning cleaning the flat and making sure they had everything they needed, while Kwame and Ayo promised to stay home that day to give Musa more time to spend with his son and agreed to come for dinner the next day to celebrate New Year's together. The entire day felt surreal. Musa went to pick up Ndidi and hadn't expected to cry before even getting in the car, but as soon as he heard Ndidi thank him for choosing him and bringing him home, Musa burst into tears before promising Ndidi that he would never be alone again and that he would always have his father with him. When they got home, they spent the entire day baking together and getting to know each other, having a mini food fight, after which Musa showed Ndidi to his new room and bathroom. That night, Musa and Ndidi decided to have a movie night, during which they fell asleep on the couch and didn't wake up until the following day. Kwame were coming over around 8, so they would have time to spend with Ndidi before celebrating the new year. Quickly getting up and tidying the flat, Musa told Ndidi about Kwame and Ayo, sharing all his college experiences before letting Ndidi do whatever he wanted while he headed to the kitchen to cook dinner for all 4 of them. Musa was really excited for Ndidi to meet his best friend. He hoped that telling Ndidi about them would help him understand how important they were to him, and he hoped that they would all get along well. That night, when Kwame and Ayo came over, all 4 of them had a blast. They got along so well that it felt like Ndidi had always been part of the family. When it was time for the fireworks, they all moved to the porch with chairs set out and glasses of wine and juice for Ndidi in their hands. That's when Musa realized this was all he needed in life. He had a fantastic friend, a beautiful son, and was financially stable. Even though it wasn't the family Musa had dreamed of his whole life, it was still perfect and he couldn't have asked for more. This story of Musa teaches us that life's most profound connections often come when we least expect them. From an orphan who faced hardships, Musa's journey led him to a moment where fate reunited him with his own son, a reflection of the power of destiny. His unwavering kindness, dedication to helping others, and resilience through personal struggles show that even in the face of uncertainty, Allah's plan is always unfolding for our greater good. This powerful lesson reminds us to trust in Allah's wisdom, give back to those in need, and cherish the blessings of love, family, and compassion. May we always find strength in our faith and spread kindness wherever we go.